great. I'm going to ask you to completely ignore it until the last 10 minutes of the class, because we're going to talk about a whole lot of other stuff relevant to Kabbalah. And while this has many pretty pictures on it, I don't want it to get too distracting until we get to that point. If you have not yet grabbed one of these, do grab one on your way out. They're really fun, and they'll be relevant to some of your continued study on all things Kabbalah. Just quick thumb dial, because I don't want to go too fast or too slow. This is never the same class twice. From a thumb dial of I know absolutely nothing about this topic to I could teach my very own version of this class, where would you guys pick yourselves? All right, well, that's helpful, and I guarantee you that I'm gonna, say some things that people who know a little bit about Kabbalah are gonna go, God, I've known that for 20 years already. But hopefully for even the really experienced people here, you're gonna get a couple of new nuggets. That's my goal, is for you to have one new piece of information or a few new ways of looking at things to hang your hat on. If you're completely brand new to Kabbalah, I am probably going to say things that are going to sail past. I'll try not to do that too much. But if questions come up or I say something that you're just like, what the hell are you on about? Don't hesitate to raise your hand. This isn't a huge formal lecture. I try to do interactive and experiential classes. I'd like to start with a real quick round of introductions, and just in a quick nutshell, name, pronoun, and what do you most want to get out of this class? And I'll start with me. I'm Miriam. I use they, them pronouns, and what I want to get out of this class is knowing what you guys find interesting about Kabbalah. Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I'm here to learn things that I don't know.
Yay.
I'm Val.
Hi, Val.
Hi, Val.
And your pronoun?
She.
She. Excellent. Thank you.
My name is Mark, cis male, and I just like learning.
Okay. Cis male isn't a pronoun?
Yeah, he.
Thank you.
I'm Ben, he, him. I would like to see if Kabbalah can be explained in a way that's intelligible.
I would like to see that too. Excellent. Let's go ahead and continue back here.
Mayor, she, just drilling it down deeper.
Michael, he. Did you do that right?
And what do you want to know about Kabbalah?
It sounded interesting, so I might take a look.
Excellent. That's how many great adventures are started. Go ahead and continue with you.
Audra, she, her, it, whatever.
Perfect.
It's cool. Yeah, I pretty much am interested in learning anything about the Kabbalah at any time.
Excellent.
My name is Rosie. She. I'm just interested in seeing what more I can learn about the Kabbalah, and also to get some laughs out of it as well, because I know that I like your humor, so I'm.
Excellent. Yes, the bad humor is free. Hey there.
I'm Brandon. He is a recognition of a divine masculine and feminine unification within myself. I recognize it so far for what I know as a sort of successive system of changing one's consciousness, and I hope to be able to change myself from the inside out, and hopefully with the aim and goal of manifesting more things that I want to be able to create.
Excellent. Thank you.
Marcelo here. I want to know anything I can know about Kabbalah, and I think you can explain a little more simple way, so it's gonna be great if you can do that, because it's your home. Okay, so yeah, that's maybe my goal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sarah, she, and here to learn. Francisco. I've been learning. I've been listening to some podcasts about Kabbalah, and I just want to learn more and take all my questions out today.
Celeste, she, her. I'm just going to be learning about it for the rest of my life. So, yeah, it's all the time. I love it. And I was really excited to come to one of your classes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, just a little bit about me. I've taught a lot of this stuff at my former lodge, Scarlet Woman in Austin, Texas. I haven't done a lot of teaching here. So for those of you who haven't taken classes with me before, I'm Miriam BatAsherah Green. I've been studying Kabbalah for 20 years now. And I remember being really disappointed by some of my first classes. I went to a class on the Hebrew alphabet, sponsored by the Golden Dawn in Phoenix about 21 years ago, and remember really cramming for that course. I was really excited and I was going to learn enough to keep up. And the person who was teaching the class didn't seem to know as much as me and was mostly reading off of note cards. And I went, this really isn't my thing. And wanted to find a way ever since then to really approach this stuff from the inside out. I subsequently went back to school. I got my degree in religious studies. I have a concentration in Jewish studies. I wouldn't by any stretch of the imagination say I'm an expert scholar at any of this. I really do read Hebrew at the Hungry Little Caterpillar reading level. But even being able to read at the Hungry Little Caterpillar reading level, I found changed my experience of this stuff. I am a Thelemite. I am very happy to be a member of the O.T.O. And I do think about Kabbalah from a Western esoteric perspective, but I'm very lucky that I have my scholarship background to draw on to put Kabbalah and Hebrew mysticism in a cultural context and within a wider framework of having been a Jewish studies major. I like to frame when I'm teaching that what I tend to do is listen to whom I'm talking to and try to give you something that you may not get elsewhere. So if I'm teaching to a mostly Jewish audience, I'm going to dial up the Western esoteric aspect of things because that's something that's not being heard there. When I teach to Western esotericists, I really dial up the Jewish perspective because that's something I feel like we don't necessarily hear a lot of within the context of the Western esoteric tradition. I want to be really clear about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it because I'm not trying to say there's one right and only way of doing Kabbalah. And I'm definitely not saying that the Jews or the rabbis have a lock on this stuff. But I do want to create more cross-pollination between that cultural context and the Western esoteric context. Something I found really interesting as I was studying these things is that when I really didn't know a whole lot about Kabbalah from either perspective, I couldn't tell the difference. I went through a period of learning about Kabbalah from both perspectives, and for a while they seemed to teach about Kabbalah in an hour and 15 minutes without having any of my resources at hand, which really helped me understand what I knew and what I didn't know pretty quickly. And I like to call this all the Kabbalah years ago. Richard Kaczynski answered the question I asked everyone at the beginning with, I want to know how you are going to pull this off. So we'll see how we pull it off this time. It's never the same class twice.
Universal filing cabinet.
Universal filing cabinet, that's Israel Regardi, and I think it's very true. Yes.
It seems that each Sephirah is a new step in awareness, which is what I'm interested in. It's sort of a movement through different states of awareness of oneself and aspects of one's life and what's going on in it.
Good stuff. What else? Other associations or ideas that come to mind?
Tree of life.
Tree of life. So we're going to talk about all of that today. As I mentioned to some people who walked in earlier, I'm actually going to get to the Tree of Life fairly late in this class. And it has to do with the same thing I was talking about with my bias. 90% of the books out there on Western esoteric Kabbalah are all about the Tree of Life. And maybe the other 10% are about everything else that's Kabbalah. In Jewish mysticism, you'll find quite the reverse. The tree just doesn't have nearly as prominent a place. The tree is a small piece of this much richer history. So we're going to talk about like all the other stuff that you might not hear elsewhere, but I do promise we'll get to the tree, and we won't completely skimp on that. And then this, is my intro class. We're actually going to be, we're talking right now about doing a class in July about the dual nature of the soul from a Kabbalistic perspective. I have entire classes about letters and entire classes about all kinds of other Kabbalistic hoo-ha. But for right now, what I'd like to do is just invite everyone to get comfortable. We're going to take a moment to just get in touch with and ground into some of the energies that Kabbalists work with. And I want to invite you to just find your center of gravity. If it feels comfortable to you, to soften your gaze, or maybe even close your eyes. And what I want to do is reach toward a place that is as close to us as breathing in is to breathing out. There are multiple levels of reality, and they're all interconnected. In a very real sense, we are always at the center, which is the circumference of all. And beyond all ideas of perception, reality, beyond all ideas of sense, there's a great nothingness that holds everything else. The great nothingness, which is the eye through which we see all else, and we call that nothingness N. N is just the great non-dual nothing. And the N is limitless, without end, Ein Sof. The infinite nothing. And the nothing reaches out to the mirror of space, which is the endless nothing. And some might even say that the nothing makes love to the endlessness, reaching out into the mirror of space with love and bringing forth a limitless light, an Ein Sof Or, a limitless radiance. And from that limitless radiance, all things known and unknown, all things seen and unseen, all things which we are capable of knowing, and the things that are beyond our capability of knowing, all of those emerge. And all of those spill forth into what we might call letters, into what we might call gods, into what we might call souls, or sephirot, all the possibility of idea. And taking a space to breathe in and out, there's a sound that happens right before you breathe, the potentialist sound. And that potentialist sound holds up everything, it holds down everything, it transcends all ideas of up and down. We call that sound before sound Aleph, the great soundlessness. And Aleph is one dimension by which the great nothing, the great limitless light comes forth into being, creating one dimension up and down. And going down, down, down into the sound of our belly, the sound of the great water, the sound of the great earth, the sound of the great support, the sound that makes an Om possible, we find the letter Mem. Mem, the great waters. Mayim, the great sea. And the Mem supports all of the bottom, going from east to west. It brings forth the power of water to support underneath the Aleph's power of air. And it creates yet another dimension, a dimension of time. And above them both is a sacred fire emanating forth from north to south, from heat to cold. And we call that power Shin. Shin. Just like the holy fire shining, Shin. And that power goes forth from north to south, holding with the Mem below, holding with the Aleph at the center, and creating all dimensions in which possibility can ring forth. With that, we can come back to this room and this particular possibility and talk a little bit about this crazy dimensionality in which we exist. When you sort of think about Kabbalah, we're talking about one oral tradition that exists within the context of a long history of interpretation. Certainly other Western religions have an interpretive culture or a theology. But the Jewish religion in particular has a very long history of not only the text, the Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh, right? It's what we think of as the Old Testament, although some people object to it being called Old. And from the Tanakh, we have a set of stories called the Midrash, right? They're stories about the text. There are two entirely different Talmudim, if you will, which are expansions on the Midrash. And so when we think about the Kabbalistic texts, these are part of a really long history of saying, hey, yeah, we know this thing happened in the Bible. Here's the backstory on that. Here's the gossip. Here's that thing that happened. So the Zohar is probably one of the best known Kabbalistic texts. The Zohar is basically just a mystical version of the Talmud. It's saying, no, those texts over there, here's what really happened. Okay, we got the inside dirt. Those Talmud people, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. We know the true story. If you look at the Gates of Light, it's a similar medieval text, early Renaissance text. The Bahir, I particularly love the Bahir because it's written in really bad Hebrew by Renaissance rabbis who knew Hebrew about as well as I do, so I can actually read the Bahir in Hebrew. It's pretty exciting. But the core texts and the core sort of mythos that Western esoteric tradition is drawing on is actually much, much older. A lot of this comes from what is not classically thought of as Kabbalah, but is an earlier form of Jewish mysticism. This idea of the cube of space, which I was just referencing with the three cardinal letters, the three mother letters, comes out of a book called the Sefer Yetzirah, which dates from 4th through 6th century CE, depending on who you're paying attention to. And most of what we use in the Western esoteric tradition is actually pre-Kabbalistic, in the sense that it's finding its origin in this much earlier text. So the idea of the three classes of letters, which we'll talk about, the idea of the dimensions of space, and attributing the Hebrew letters to dimensions of space. This idea of sort of the powers that be as an architect of the universe, stretching us up to down and north to south and west to east, and placing the letters as guardians of the known world, really does come out of this very, very early text. And later that gets built on and expounded upon in later Kabbalistic texts, where we get a whole bunch of gossip about the letters. There's some very juicy gossip in the Zohar, as well as later glyphs like the Tree of Life, which tend to show up in sort of late medieval through early Renaissance times. One of the things that I really like to work with as we're just getting started is the idea of four worlds. And as we'll talk about as we start getting into more of the Sephirot, the four worlds are worlds that we can map to the Tree of Life, but I think they're a much broader concept than that. And the idea is that we're coming from this nothingness and this endless nothingness and this limitless light into something, right? Some way of exploding forth into being. And one of the ways we can think about that is what are called the Sephirot, which are the spheres of the Tree of Life. But another way of looking at the same idea is thinking of these things in terms of worlds of emanation. The highest world, if you will, the one that is least accessible to us, is the world of Atzilut. Atzilut translates pretty much as the nearness. And I particularly, who's familiar with Lon Duquette's The Chicken Kabbalah? A few of you. I want to actually, I kind of hate Lon for this book because he took my shtick. This is the only book in the Western esoteric tradition, I think, that teaches really deeply on the sort of non-Sephirot stuff and the non-tree stuff. So I recommend this book highly. I swear to God I did not crib this book from Lon, but it's truly awesome. And so he talks about the four worlds in a very sort of fun way that I think is really accessible. Is, imagine you've got these esoteric beings. And being esoteric beings, they got a lot on their hands, right? And they're tired, right? And so there are different ways of manifesting how to support yourself around being tired. And in Lon's vision, the heavenly beings in Atzilut are like, yeah, rest would be nice. Right? That's as conceptual as things really need to get. the angels in Atzilut are, they're self-aware enough to know that some kind of rest would be a good idea. And that's as fully formed as anything really needs to be in Atzilut. And Atzilut is the, in the tarot, it's the realm of wands, right? So we've got that kind of first inspiration, that first fire of idea. Not a lot else going on there. We move down a level and we move into the world of cups. Now we have a container for ideas, right? And that's the world of Bria. And Bria, the word is very closely related to the words for blessing. And in the world of Bria, we can hold an idea. And an idea can become more fully formed because it literally has a form to flow into. It's the world of emotion. Chairs. Wouldn't chairs be a great idea for us divine beings? We should like invent that or something, right? So here we are in the world of Bria. We've got an emotion, it's fully formed, and we can go somewhere with it. We can direct that water where we want it to go. One world down from that is the world of Yetzirah. We may have already heard this world. The Sefer Yetzirah is the book of formation. Yetzirah is literally formation. It's also related to the word for one's personal inclination. One's Yetzer is your tendency toward an emotional disposition. Right, so Yetzer is about planning. Yetzer is about direction. It's the world of swords or pens or blades in the tarot. The world of Yetzirah has architects and draftsmen. And there is a whole army of angels in the world of Yetzirah, and damn it if they're not drafting you some pretty kick-ass chairs right now, right? That's what Yetzirah does. That's the whole purpose of Yetzirah. So there's like this army, draftsmen, Yetzirah, good place. Asya is the world closest to accessibility. It's the most tangible world. If there is a manifest reality, it exists within Asya, although I would not say it's the totality of Asya. My mnemonic I never used to be able to tell Atzilut and Asya apart, and then I remembered that I get a sit on my ass, so that's how I remember the two. In Asya, they've got a production company and they are making us some damn chairs, right? There are chairs manifesting because we have the world of Asya. In the Tree of Life, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but you'll notice that we've got a triangle and another triangle and another triangle and a pendant. And one of the ways to think about the tree in the worlds is to say the top triad is Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asya, which, as you start working with these Sephirot, is actually a really good way of thinking about what's going on in each of those triads, or in the case of Malkut, the independent pendant. You could also, and a lot of people do, believe that there is an entire tree operating in each one of those worlds, and those trees interconnect at their top and bottom points. Different ways of looking at the same thing. Neither of these are true. It's all models, right? Sometimes one model is going to be more useful for what you're trying to map in Keith's universal filing cabinet than the other. Another way of looking at these, we talked about the suits in the four worlds. So we've got our wands, our cups, our blades, and our discs. Also the trumps map this way, and this is where it gets super messy because every single tarot deck seems to have its own way of doing trumps right now. But I'm going to look at it the Hebrew way, father, mother, son, daughter, right? However your tarot deck maps to that, with kings or knights or whatever. Yeah, anyway. Who's familiar with the wake world? Anyone? If you want a single Crowley text to take you on a little tour of the Tree of Life and the Worlds, you cannot go wrong by reading the Wake World. It is a happy little fairy tale in which someone gets progressively enlightened, awakened by traveling up the tree. But it's really a story about the redemption of the daughter via the prince. And this is an idea that you'll come up with over and over and over again in both Western esoteric tradition and to a lesser degree the Jewish tradition. This idea of each of us replicating this journey, this fool's journey, if you will, by being the daughter redeemed and working our way up the tree. And as you go up the tree, themes begin to repeat themselves until suddenly you discover that you're not the princess anymore, you're the queen. You're not the prince anymore, you're the king. One of the things that I happen to really like most about thinking about the four worlds and thinking about the Hebrew letters is this idea that I've seen quite a bit in Hebrew, modern Hebrew Kabbalah, but I've seen very little in Western esoteric. So the letters of the Tetragrammaton also map to the tree. Tetragrammaton is just a fancy Greek way of saying that Hebrew name we're not supposed to pronounce with 4 letters. The name of God, which is actually kind of funny because if you do a lot of Kabbalah, there's all kinds of things about how to pronounce this word. If you're really into that thing, Rev. David Cooper has an entire CD on Sounds True where he just goes through and tries different vowels to see what happens. Nobody apparently died. It's fun stuff. But if you look at this yud, this hey, this vav, and this hey, something interesting emerges. A head, shoulders, a torso, maybe with a big cock if you're into that kind of thing, and some legs. We literally have the body of God. So something I want to do is, I'm not sure if we've got an exact even number or not, but I'd like to invite people to just pair up with somebody real quickly. Okay. Let's not overthink this. Right. Stand up. We're gonna wake up for a second. Wake up! Wake up! All right, all I want you to stand facing one another. If there are 3 people, we can find a way to make it work. We're polygodorous this way. And literally all I want you to do is envision the body of God on your partner. We're going to envision a yud on the head, envision the hay on the shoulders and the legs, right? Envision that vav on the straight torso. And just envision that for all intents and purposes, and we may know this from the Mass as well, your partner is the body of God. Let's take a moment to see them through that divine light. And when you're feeling really secure in that idea, that your partner is indeed the body of God, just take a moment to tell them, you're the body of God.
You're the body of God.
And when you're ready, you can just thank your partner, and we'll come back to the brainiac stuff.
this body. Thank you. It was very easy to do with your
And this kind of idea, this exact way of seeing the Tetragrammaton as the divine being doesn't tend to come through much, but we do see this in the Western esoteric tradition in a different way. You'll often see a graphic called the Adam Kadmon, right? Same idea. You're going to see somebody superimposed on the tree itself. And this is very, it's fairly traditional to view, if you were going to look at it that way, your head would actually be right here, which, fancy, there's an actual, like, extra sephira there that is not a sephira, it's wacky. It's called da'at, it's knowledge. It's also a pun because when you use the term da'at to refer to a person or a place, you're actually saying you shtuked them, which is a great way of making your Hebrew teacher blush when you don't know Hebrew very well yet. It's pretty awesome because you're constantly saying you fucked somebody in class and your teacher's like, no, the other verb, really. Anyway, so if you put the head here, thank you. The Adam Kadmon would normally have a head here, the supernals are sort of arcing above, the body is here, Yesod is attributed to the penis, or the phallus, if we want to be very correct about these things, and then feet and malchut. So same idea, just slightly different ways of getting at the same idea that whether we're looking at the tree or we're looking at the Tetragrammaton itself, in a way we're looking at a way of attributing the divine to everybody. Because this whole idea of like the fall, like that's Christian theology. That is not in any of the Hebrew texts. Sacred sexuality is very much part of it, and having a role as the embodied sacred is really critical. So, a lot of the Zohar and other Kabbalistic texts, which I'm not going to get into too deeply, are really frickin' sexy, right? A lot of what we're talking about is how to honor the divine erotic, how to honor the embodied divine, how to welcome the Sabbath bride, how to really bring in the joy of sacred sexuality. So that's not something that we're imposing on Kabbalah from a Western esoteric tradition. It's there. If there's nothing else that I get out of Kabbalistic practice, it's recognizing the sacred conduit from which you can bring the divine out there toward the divine in here. That, every center truly is the circumference. But I digress. Speaking of embodied stuff, so how many souls do we get in the Kabbalah? It's only partially a trick question.
Depends on the book.
Depends on?
The book.
Depends on the book. That's a perfectly legit answer. Also a legit answer. I'm gonna start there. One thing that you will find is we can get into endless arguments about do we have 3 or 5 souls. My answer to that is that 2 of the souls are transpersonal and 3 is enough work for most people in most lifetimes. But you will find if you look at classical ideas of the soul, that there are 2 transpersonal souls, Yechida and Chaya, which when I teach soul work, I don't usually teach because, again, like most of us are not going to be working with that until we get to a certain point of enlightenment. And then 3 souls that we can't get away from because they're hanging around all the damn time for better or worse. The soul that is right here next to my skin, that I can feel if somebody's like way too close in my space, or the part of me that knows when I'm hungry, when I'm thirsty, when I really need to, ooh, that person's kind of hot, right? The part of me that tingles when I feel the eyes in the back of my head, the part of me that gets hangry if I haven't had enough to eat recently, is called our nefesh. Nefesh is the animal soul. Nefesh, you will sometimes hear referred to as the younger self, or the animal self, the sticky one. If anyone studies fairy witchcraft, sticky one is how it's referred to there. But it's a battery, right? Our nefesh is right close to our flesh, and it's an ongoing battery. Yes?
I've heard it used in reference to more flesh-based circumstances or decisions, or essentially kind of like an infant conscious state, in a sense, compared to others.
I think that's fair. I think our mind-body consciousness is most active in our nefesh. I wouldn't do a one-to-one equation of the nefesh with the body necessarily, but it's a pre-verbal, smells and bells embodied soul. Like part of why magic works so well when we use barbaric tongues and we have smells and bells and colors and pictures. Frankly, part of why all of the associations that we normally put in the tree and the tarot and all of that work are because there's this entire kind of pre-verbal soul that we're trying to get on board. And as with any toddler, if you don't get your nefesh on board, good luck getting any heavy magic done. If your nefesh is tired or cranky or bored, you ain't getting nothing done. And it's super critical. Then there's our ruach, and our ruach is kind of our spidey sense. I've heard the term talking self used. I don't like that very much. I think it's really reductionist. But definitely our perceptual body. Sometimes I've heard our shining one or our etheric egg. This is where, like, if people sort of get into your personal space, not like right up on you, but you can sort of tell when someone's in your bubble. This is your bubble. Our ruach is really good at language, concepts, ideas. So our nefesh is right down here in Asya, right? Our nefesh likes things very concrete. Our nefesh is building us some damn chairs, right? Our ruach is designing us some damn chairs. Our ruach speaks that language of blades and ideas and concepts, and it's very, very good at things. And because our ruach is very, very good at things, our ruach is also very good at leading us astray by rationalizing things when we are not in touch with our nefesh. And then there's our neshama. And our neshama often is conceptualized as sort of like a halo, or sometimes I've heard the fairies call it our sacred dove. Neshama, nishma is the breath. So that idea of something that's as close to us as breathing in is to breathing out. Neshama is she who listens. So that part of our soul that listens to the divine, but also listens to our personal things and can transmit them up. So I love that dual idea of nishma, the breath, and neshama, the listening. And so here we're really in that realm of bria, right? We're encompassing, we're expansive, we've got a big container to hold ideas, but hold them loosely and hold them without too tight a grip. Our nishma is pretty much, when there is no part of me that is not of the gods, right? I'm sending that straight from me to whatever is my personal, whatever's up here, I tend to think of as my personal hotline to God, maybe my HGA. My nishma has a direct hotline to my HGA, in my opinion. There are other people, and Thorncoil and I can disagree on this for hours and hours as to whether or not the HGA and the nishma are the same or not. I tend to go they're about this close, but not the same. She tends to go they're the same. So reasonable minds may disagree. But my personal God soul is my connection to whatever is the out there, including the out there if I'm really aligned. Interesting trick about working with the souls Kabbalistically is that your Ruach is really good at thinking about things and having big thoughts. And I do not mean to diss the Ruach. Ruach is great. It does many, many useful things, including designing chairs. I'm a fan. And you cannot get to your neshma directly through your Ruach. You cannot get directly to your God soul through your thinking brain alone. If you do not get your animal soul engaged, you are not going to get there. This is why sex magic works. This is why the smells and bells of the Mass work. When we engage ourselves fully, sensually, and with a wide range of techniques and get all of ourselves on board and aligned, then magic starts doing cool, spooky things, right? I'm just going to do a quick, speaking of my Ruach, I'm going to do a quick time check. Oh, yay, I'm exactly on time. I love it when that happens. Thank you for the meccas. Just saying. So is all of this so far making a stupid kind of sense? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about the early examples of the three souls thing, where that comes from, where you've read about it. What else? Anybody else that's talked about it?
Hey. I'm gonna say first, I'm not a Talmudic scholar. Like, I've inched my way through some of that. I ain't any good at it. This stuff's fairly well embedded in the Kabbalistic literature I've encountered, and particularly you're gonna see a lot of this in texts like the 13 Attributes work, which you see a lot in Hebrew Kabbalah, but not so much in Western Kabbalah. If you're into this kind of stuff, Steinsaltz has some good references, as does Reb Rami Shapiro. At least as far back as the Zohar, it's pretty much assumed that you're going to have this familiarity. I'm trying to remember if this is actually in the Behir or not. I'm not positive. I'm pretty sure this idea is already fairly well embedded in Giktila's Gates of Light. So I mean, you're looking at, huh? Yeah, I mean, I just like, it's something that's like, it's not in the Sefer Yetzirah, but the Sefer Yetzirah is pretty technical, so it wouldn't be. I'm just not sure. Like, my hunch is that this is probably. This is probably a much older idea than Kabbalah, but I'm out of my depth at that point. And particularly an idea that I'm not talking about right now, but if you come back in July, apparently I'm teaching it. There's an idea that's pretty old about what's called the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. or as I like to think of them, our inner order Muppet and our inner chaos Muppet, which deals with the nature of the soul. It's embedded particularly in the Ruach, but also in the Nefesh. And that idea is very firmly there by Rashi. So it's not new.
Okay.
Great question. I love those questions, and they stump me because I'm not. I don't know. I spent most of my Jewish studies time studying other stuff. So letters, and then I do promise I will get to the tree. It's over there. It's hanging on me. So we talked a little bit about Aleph, Mem, and Shin, right? I would say that various mysteries of the Hebrew letters overall are a very large part of the Kabbalistic literature. Particularly the Zohar is all about stuff in the letters, and it's really there's an idea that the Hebrew texts themselves were written in white fire on black and in black fire on white, right? That there's this mystical element to the written text, which we wouldn't know anything about from the manuscripts of our own tradition or studying those too closely. But very simple ideas. The shape of letters becomes really important. What does it mean that a shin has yuds at the top of each of its branches? What do the sounds of the letters mean? What do the combinations of letters mean? Interpretations about why certain letters look like one another, why they don't look like one another. And this comes out of a textual tradition, which I would say the entire, I don't usually teach this, but I feel like I need to this time. So yay, new material this class. This comes out of this idea of interpretation that's thought of as pardes. And I'm going to write it backwards because it goes this way. And I apologize, I do not know how to write in proper script Hebrew. I only know cursive, and that really sucks for everybody. Pardes means a garden of pomegranates, literally. So when you see Israel Regardie's title, The Garden of Pomegranates, he's talking about this acronym, and acronyms are like the shiz in Hebrew. They get used a lot. We're really like an acronym heavy place because it's all got secret meaning. Pardes is also the root word for paradise, right? And the idea is it's an acronym or what we call an hetericon for 4 different ways of looking at text. There's the plain meaning, which is the pshat, right? So, yep, that story about Adam and Eve, yep, that's what happened, I believe it. Pshat is the Donald Trump level of interpretation for most texts. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Okay, great. That's not how Jews do things. There's actually really funny, was it Kasich? One of the presidential candidates recently went into a Hebrew bookstore trying to mansplain theology to Talmud scholars. It was really quite brilliant. I'm pretty sure it was Kasich. So yeah, Kasich speaking pshat, not doing so well. Remez is a hint or a joke. Remez is the nudge, nudge, wink, wink of scholarship. So it says, oh, look at that. There's a funny little joke there. I think that might mean something. Lover, if thou wilt depart, right? I just made a funny dick joke. What does that mean? Remez. Is there meaning there? Yeah, maybe. If you read Hebrew, the Bible is really funny because it is actually filled with all kinds of puns. Lots and lots of puns. That's where Remez plays out. Drash, it gets back to that word I used earlier, midrash. A drash is a story. So the entire Talmud is a set of midrashim, a set of stories. The Zohar is a different set of stories. So the entire structure of the Zohar says this section of the Zohar applies to Genesis 1:9. And then it goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages. It's this whole story about Genesis 1:9. Drash might be, what's this thing that happens where Genesis 1 tells us this entire story of creation, and then starting over at Genesis 3, there's this whole, why did we hit the reset button? Oh wait, Adam must have had a first wife. Her name was Lilith. Let me tell you all about Lilith. That's the level of drash, right? There's this weird gap in the text that's going to allow us to tell all these other stories about it. Sod is the final level, and Sod, you'll recognize that root word from Yesod, which is one of the Sephirot. Sod is the secret. So the whole idea is we have this plain text, we have this weird little inconsistency that is almost a joke, that is a doorway in. Then we have this story about it, and all of that's pointing at some kind of esoteric meaning. And of course these levels of reality tie in with the tarot. They tie in with the worlds. They tie in with these parts of the body of God. They tie in with our souls. We have the part that is, the plain meaning, it's a chair. And that's a different way you could do a chair. And let me tell you a story about this idea I have, a place you could put your butt, right? As we go back through the levels of reality, things get less concrete and more potential. And I don't know what's going on with him, but he's having a good old time.
I think it's a circular saw. I think it's might be cutting wood or something.
Excellent!
Cleaning.
He's making chairs!
Yeah.
Okay. So, this idea, that we're coming through over and over and over, why is all this stuff important? Why do we care about letters? Why do we care about this? And the whole methodology is really about trying to peel back the layers and see if there's something more important, more sacred, more interesting going on behind the scenes that we can plug into. So Aleph, Mem, and Shin we talked about as three axes of the universe. Aleph really is the sound before sound. It is a silent vowel, or technically it's a consonant because they're all consonants. It's a silent consonant that can hold pretty much any other sound. It's often thought of as the noise you make when you open your mouth but before any sound has come out. So it's attributed to this sort of first pillar, this precursor, if you will, to the rest of reality. And this is again drawing on the Sefer Yetzirah, and then this comes up later. Mem is seen as a watery support. Mem literally is the letter for water. The sea is mayim in Hebrew. And then Shin is, again, that fiery essence. And so classically in Hebrew, there's really not an earth element. Those are the three elements: air, water, and fire. And they're attributed to those three letters. Then there's another class of letters which are the double letters. I still can't, as a speaker of modern Hebrew, I have a hard time sort of quite wrapping my head around it, but the idea is that these are letters that had a dual pronunciation. There are 7 of them. Some of them still do, like the letter bet can be pronounced as a b or as a v, depending on the word. So it might be bet for house, or it might be Rivka for Rebecca. Same letter, but pronounced differently depending on context. And because of this, they're all seen as having a double meaning as well. So, for example, bet is the letter of life and death. And those are attributions, not meanings. The letter bet actually means house. The letter gimel, which is the Hebrew word for camel, is used as the stand-in for peace and war. Dalet, which is a door, is used as a stand-in for wisdom and folly. You might know that a little bit. Kaf is a stand-in for riches and poverty. Peh is seen as a stand-in for grace and indignation. And I actually love that because peh is the letter for the mouth. And it's also like, peh. When I hear that indignation, peh. Lesh is the letter of fertility and solitude. And taf is the letter for power and servitude, which also resonates with the fact that we use taf as the letter for the universe and the tarot. So pretty much if you can double anything, it's going to attribute. But what else can we think of that has 7s that you might want to map on to the 7 double letters? Planets, classical planets at least. Metals. Chakras.
Octaves.
Sure. Days of the week. Right? So what you're going to find over and over, if you like to use the tree of life and the letters as a universal filing cabinet, is if you can make 3 of something, somebody has probably mapped that to the mothers. If you can make 7 of something, somebody has probably mapped that to the doubles. Back when I thought that the tree of life and Kabbalah were the same thing, one of the first ways that I taught myself some of this stuff was 1994. I had a Macintosh SE computer. It was very fancy. It was this little box. And I don't even think Excel existed yet. I think it was Lotus 123. And I took Aleister Crowley's 777, which is just endless columns of all this data, and turned it into a big spreadsheet. Which is not a bad way to learn some of these associations. But what you'll find is that when you unlock this pattern of 3 and 7 and some other number we're going to get to in a second, why things fit where they do starts making a lot more sense. So we've got 3s, we've got 7s. How many more letters do we have?
11.
12. What on earth might we attribute to 12s of things?
Zodiac.
Zodiac?
12 fast, 12 furious.
12 fast, 12 free. Yes, and I want to see a 131 article on that. Yes.
12 months.
12 months. 12 apostles. I wanted to be a Christian Kabbalist, which that makes me a little twitchy, but you can cut that out of the video, by the way, sorry. I wasn't trying to diss you, really. If you can come up with a 12, it's going to be mappable, right? And we have, and over and over again, I mean, the basic foundations of the Babylonian-based mathematical system can get mapped back, right? The 12 simple letters, in case anybody cares and is following along at home: Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Tzadi, and Kof. And those are also attributed to some attributions. Traditionally, those are going to be sight, hearing, smell, speech, taste, sexual love, work, movement, anger, mirth, imagination, and sleep. If we were going to make a cube of space, I needed to get a thing to wipe this off. I'm not very colorful. So if I were to have a cube, I've got my attributions of Aleph, Mem, and Shin going in my different directions. That made sense somewhere that's not here. Thank you. All right. And then I've got this happy little cube, which looks vaguely cube-like. My faces of the cube and the center are going to be my 7 double letters. And then each line of the cube is going to be one of my 12 single letters. If you are really into cube of space stuff, O.T.O does some great work around this. Townsend has a book on the cube of space that used to make my brain melt. And for some reason now, this is just sort of where my brain lives. But there's some really interesting stuff. And the cube of space is just, it's a very different way of mapping Kabbalistic attributes that I think is not better than the Tree of Life, not better than the Sephirot, but just a different way of looking at the same material, and particularly a different way of looking at the 12 letters that I think can be a little bit richer in their interrelations than where those letters end up on the Etz Chaim, or on the Tree of Life. And just, a little bit more on letters, and then I'm really truly going to talk about the Sephirot. Really, for real, I am going to. So we talked a little bit about sound, right? Whether or not a letter can be doubled in the way it sounds. Whether I can have a hard or soft G, I can have a hard or soft R, I can have a hard or soft D, I can have a hard or soft B. That is considered a mystery of the letters. Whether or not a letter even carries a sound, like in the case of Aleph. Whether or not that sound seems to convey a deeper meaning, like that it's just something deep and watery and beautiful about the very sound of Mem. Shh. There's something very fiery and essential in the sound of a Shin. So the sounds get important. As I mentioned earlier, the shapes are important in a way that is way beyond the scope of this discussion. Although if you're really interested in that kind of stuff, there's a rabbi and amazing calligrapher named Lawrence Kushner, not to get compared with the other Rabbi Kushner, who's much more popular.
I think that's Harold.
Harold, thank you. Lawrence Kushner does some amazing calligraphic work all around the letters.
Is that book of alphabet?
Yes, yeah.
What did he say?
There's a book of the alphabet, which is all about the letters, all hand calligraphed. He also has several books on the meanings of words, which I just adore. Those are some of my very favorite Kabbalistic texts out there, modern and innovative. There's also a couple of techniques that can be useful, but also are very subject to being manipulated. One is called gematria, and gematria just comes out of the idea that the Hebrew letters are also numbers. And so for any Hebrew word, I can also come up with a numeric value. And what gematria suggests is that looking at words that have similar numerical values can help reveal some esoteric meaning, which is true. It also can be used the other way around, where if somebody wanted to take a motto in Hebrew, they might have alternate ways that they could choose to spell a magical motto. And so they might want to mess around with the spelling a little bit to make it have a particular numerical meaning. Similarly, there's a technique called notericon, which I talked about earlier. Pardes itself is a notericon. Notericon can go one of two ways. It can be creating a word from the initial letters of a phrase, or you can turn that around and make a phrase out of the initial value of treating a word so that its letters are treated as the initial value of another phrase. I think these can be neat, fun tools in our magical toolboxes. I am very much less impressed with them as techniques for extracting the one right and only true meaning of things, because they're very manipulable concepts. I can pretty much make anything add to anything with notericon if I spend enough time and effort on it. So if it's meaningful to you, or it creates more resonance, or if it's something that gets your nefesh hard, do it, right? Because that's going to make your magic more powerful. When people try to prove things to me using gematria or notericon, I laugh a little bit because they're very manipulable tools. It's very easy to spell things a million wrong ways in Hebrew, and it doesn't really mean anything. That said, none of the rest of this means anything either. So if it works for you, you know, get out of it what you will. Okay, guess what? Now you get handouts. So exciting. Very exciting. Yay, such exciting.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
So I just started approaching 777 recently, and they mentioned gematria and notericon, but there was a third faculty. I think
I know what you're talking about, but I don't.
Tomorrow.
Oh,
That
yes.
was what it was. And I'll go on to read about it on my own to like kind of elaborate on that, but I wondered if you had anything, any points or notes on that.
I'm 97% sure that when I used notericon for both expanding and contracting, I was wrong, and that Tamura is the expanding version. But I am 3% not confident that that's true. Yeah, that whole realm of things is something that's like, I literally know just enough about it to be dangerous, because it's just never been my jam. But yeah. Good question.
I'm more of a fan of tempura myself.
Yes, yes. Very, very well done. Very well done. Okay, so I'm going to start over again from the top. So we have the N, which is the great nothing, great. We have the En Sof, which is the limitless. And we have the En Sofor, which is the limitless light. So we have these three veils, if you will. They're up here with a universal hexagram, that's called. And then I have this top triad, which is in the world of Atzilut. So that is the nearness, right? Because it's near to all this. So the idea is, I hesitate to say the idea. Depending on which text you're looking at, things go into Sephirot or break them. Whether, Lurianic Kabbalah has got its own peculiarities on this. So I'm going to say for purposes of our argument that things concentrate. And does anyone want to take a guess what Sephirah means? It's kind of a trick question, and the reason I ask is that in English we tend to translate Sephirah as spheres, and it's not wrong or bad, but it's actually a sapir is more like a number. And you'll also hear an attribution to literally sapphires, gems, right? So these are numbers which are also jewel-like. This top dude, in Hebrew, his name is the crown, or as I was shocked to learn in my first week of Hebrew class, the same word also just gets used for hat, and that word is keter. And keter is sort of the first landing place into, I wouldn't call it concrete reality yet, we're pretty far up the tree, but the first sort of concentration into conceptualizing things. It's the crown of everything. Over here we have a dude named Chokhmah, which is wisdom, and his counterpart is Bina, which is understanding. And the thing that happens in each one of these triads is that you have ideas that are either harmonizing out of something or harmonizing into something. So this idea is that wisdom and understanding are counterparts in the crown of all. Wisdom is often perceived in the tree as a masculine kind quality. Bina is often seen as a more severe woman in mourning, and that's true in both Jewish and Western Kabbalah. But that wisdom and understanding are different sides of that same coin, and are both required in equal measure to cap our concepts of the divine, if you will. And again, all that's going on in absolute. It has to do with things that are generally considered beyond our day-to-day grasp, even if, you know, we hit nirvana. This stuff is kind of transpersonal. Here's that hidden Sephirah I mentioned earlier, Da'at. Da'at is knowledge. So the sort of implication there is that if we had a triad coming down from there, that knowledge would be the product of wisdom and understanding, and the threshold through which we have that attainment to the divine. And again, this is also seen very deeply as a sexual metaphor. So there's something there perhaps about an erotic connection with the transpersonal divine. And the erotic as a component to cracking through the ego and the personal and making a connection with the transpersonal.
Can I ask a question? I heard through some lecture that this was actually somebody's idea.
And I'm listening and getting water at the same time, so keep talking.
That this was pulled down.
Uh-huh.
Have you come across that? Do you know what I mean?
That it was pulled down. Tell me more about
I
that.
heard
Like
about that too.
the fall, that it actually has to do with the fall of Adam and Eve.
Well,
And
see,
that
here's the
thought
problem.
it used to be up, and then it was pulled down.
Yeah, here's going to be my challenge is that there is an entire set of theology around Christian Kabbalah and Christian interpretations of Kabbalah that I am not very conversant with. For example, there's a whole thing about inserting shin in the tetragrammaton and creating the name Yeshua, which other people could tell you about a lot. I can't tell you anything about the fall because the fall has nothing to do with Jewish theology.
I think those are just sort of stuck together.
No. And I'm not criticizing the question. I'm just saying that I'm the wrong scholar for it.
But in your studies, have you heard of anything about this being pulled down, regardless if it had anything to do with the fall? No, and it's not a very Jewish reading of the things. Now, like weight would probably be a good source for that. And also a lot of sort of where the Golden Dawn was coming at things was from the Golden Dawn really was approaching things from a reading of Kabbalah through a Christian lens. And between being a Jewish studies major and a Thelemite, like I know nothing. I literally did as much as possible to not learn about the Christian lens. I managed to get a religious studies degree while only taking classes in Gnosticism, so yay. But I'm the wrong person to ask. I think there is a legitimate theological interpretation. If you're going to use Kabbalah from a Christian perspective, there's an absolute argument to be made in favor of what you're saying. I am just not at all conversant with it. So let's just forget about the Christian idea.
Yeah.
Through your studies, have you ever read anything about the structure of the Kabbalah, that maybe at one other time that it was structured differently, or it's always been like this?
We will talk about that.
Okay, great.
It has definitely gone through many, many permutations. And the one I'm going through now is the one that's most widely used in Western esotericism, but it is definitely not the only glyph. Yeah, great question. I like that question. Not least because I can answer it. So here we are, good, okay, hey. In the world of Bina, we have Chesed. I'm going to do this two different ways. Well, no, I'll do it the way that you guys would normally see it, and then I'll explain why that's complicated. Chesed is loving kindness. You will sometimes see that translated as mercy. I think that's a very bad translation, and a mistranslation. But Chesed is loving kindness. Geburah is judgment, distinction making, and Tiferet, which is usually translated as beauty, but I think Tiferet is probably the most complex sephirah on here. I like to think of it as the linchpin that holds everything else on the tree together. This sephirah, if you start working on it, is the work of a lifetime, easily. The interesting thing about it is the translations of these sephirot that we most typically see in the Western esoteric tradition is an amalgamation of two very different ways of looking at this triad in the Hebrew. So you would normally see Chesed, Din, which is judgment, and Rachamim, which is mercy, which is why I don't like using mercy there. So there you've got the loving kindness, the judgment, and the mercy, right? And so that's one of the two triads that's going on there. There's also a triad which is Gedula, and Gedol is big. So the bigness, the expansiveness, the Gedula, the Geborah, which is the greatness, right? Gabor. So we have Gadol is big, Gabor is great. I don't know why I have this accent. Thank you. And then we've got Tiferet, which again is that beauty. So the idea there is that when I have both expansiveness and bigness of heart, if you will, and I've got greatness, then I can come together in beauty. Or when I have loving kindness tempered by judgment, then I can have true mercy. And this really gets to the heart of Hebrew ethics, which we also see in Liber Libre. Am I off the screen? Sorry.
No, I was talking about the fact that the
Okay, so in Liber Libre, we get this whole idea, which is also very, very embedded in Hebrew ethics, that mercy untempered can do just as much to allow evil to go forth into the world as can smallness or judgment untempered. That we need both. We need that balancing point. So whether we're looking at balancing the bigness and the greatness, or whether we're looking at balancing love and kindness with judgment, that's sort of the work of this triad through two different lenses. Yeah?
I just want to give a brief support to using beauty for Tiferet. I think that beauty as used in modern parlance is wrong. But especially if you're looking at beauty in the parlance of the 200s, the 100s,
Yes.
That beauty is harmony and is the balance and wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're looking at Aristotelian and the older philosophical usages of the word beauty, I think it makes sense in that spot. So
Yeah. No.
you can't use it in the current parlance though very well.
I think, yeah, and I think often with all of these, translation serves us poorly. That there's a richness to that remez, that hint that we get in the Hebrew that doesn't always convey very well. And also I think just when we're dealing with those ideas of like these expansive goodness and greatness, I do want to be clear, I'm not trying to make an argument for going around and changing your tree, by the way. Everybody's going to call these Chesed and Gevurah and Tiferet, and that's okay. But I do want people to at least be aware that you've got two very different triads operating in that spot. Yeah?
It's one of the arguments that I've heard for trying to use the Hebrew names for them as much as you can, because they have fewer associations in our head, and we can create our own associations with those words to have a more broad understanding of what they represent.
Yeah, I like that. It's very true. Getting down into the world of Yetzirah, things are getting stupid practical again. We've got pens. We know how to use them. Down in this triad, we have Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And I think of Netzach as the glorious, sacred, voluptuous. And I think of Hod as the glorious, sacred manifestation of intellect. Reasonable minds may vary, but you'll tend to see Venus gets put in Netzach and Mercury gets put in Hod, right? Different ways that, yoga and magic, right? Two different paths that are leading to Yesod, which is the world of reflection, and the world of Yesod is literally foundation. But again, we're looking at that root word of Sod, which is the secret, right? It's the heart of, the secret heart. I've never seen translations of Netzach or Yesod or Netzach or Hod that I particularly like. You get victory a lot with Netzach. If I had to translate them, I would say body stuff, brainiac stuff, nefesh stuff, ruach stuff, neshama stuff, but on a sort of smaller and more accessible scale. Different, different paths of the spiritual practice that get us toward these deeper secrets. And then Malkut's easy. Malkut is literally the kingdom. A Malka is a king or a queen. A Melech is a king. So you'll hear like, Baruch atah Adonai Melech haolam, blessed are you, our God, the King of the world. So it's that same root word. Yeah.
Is that attributable to the name Melech Taos?
Yeah. And we can go on and on about Melech Taos and yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah, see me after class. No, Melech in the Persian is actually angel, but Melech is angel because of that sort of that linguistic attribution and connection between angels, the divine, and the divine kings. Yeah. Whole other train of thought, not going down it, coming back. Yay, here I am. We were talking earlier about layouts for the tree. Is this the only layout for the tree? Oh, hell no. You will see many, many ones which may or may not have the paths in the same area, which may or may not have the letters in the same area. And particularly what you're going to find in the Western esoteric tradition, what we're probably most familiar with, is you start with Aleph here, and you sort of work your way around and down, and you're playing snakes and ladders, and you end with like Resh and Taf, right? So you're sort of going A to B down. If I were looking at the Hebrew tree, just for one example of a difference, this path would be Aleph, this path would be Mem, and this path would be Shem, which makes complete sense based on the way we've been thinking about those here. I do not have all the other paths memorized for the various Hebrew trees. I do know that there are some things that are very different. For example, I'm pretty sure these paths go away because you can only get from Malkut to Yesod in most of them. And I'm pretty sure that I get to do this in most of the Hebrew trees, which makes me a nice little Star of David up here and also gives me a direct shot from Gebra or Chesed straight up to Keter, which is not the case in the Western. So when you're doing, if you're trying to think of using the paths as a way to climb your way up the tree, there's some really radical different implications here than there are in the Western esoteric model. But again, these are all models. So whatever is resonant and has richness and depth for you and gives meaning to your spiritual work is what's going to work for you. I personally don't mess a lot with the alternate modern Hebrew trees, except that I tend to work with this a lot. Which is also kind of confusing when I'm like, is this Aleph? Is it Tet? I don't know. It just depends. But that's ways of looking at it. If you go to, actually, I found this book here earlier. If you go not much further back, this is the cover of the Porte Lucis, the original, which is also translated as The Gates of Light, Rabbi Giktila. So going back that far, the idea that we would even map the 22 letters to the tree, not there yet. You kind of have the Sephirot in a similar position. They're not equalized as much. So our top pillar is much smaller than some of our middle things. It's vaguely tree-like and there are 10 Sephirot, but that's about as close to modern as it resembles. And then if you go back not much further than that, you'll tend to see a lot of trees that are just like literally little branches, right? So these things evolve. They're not static. Hopefully they won't be static. This, because it's a living and an oral tradition, I think in a way our modern age of printing press and internet and workshop in some ways is going to slow down the process and in some ways is going to create even more innovation. slowing it down in the sense that we start believing that that poster glyph that you've got there is the tree, but also creating more conversations like this one where we can innovate. But really over the past 1,000 years, which is not that long in the history of things, we've gone from having, well, in the past 2,000 years, less than 2,000 years, we've gone from a cube of space to having Sephirot, which is, dates to about the Behir, starting to have trees and having fancier and fancier trees until we get to the modern times where we've got at least 2 and probably more standard trees. Did that answer your question?
Kind of.
Kinda. What part of your question did it not?
I'm just interested in, I've been looking at this tree for a long time. And I do see this sort of distortion with it that it has been pulled down for some strange structural reason, and I don't know why. And it's just something that's in the back of my head that now when I see it, after I heard this lecture, now that I see it, and plus I can't Dalf or whatever the knowledge one, I'm really interested in that space. And so I think if I pushed it up, then that door does open somehow. And it's just my thinking, because there's just something in me that's very curious about it. Well, I'm trying to match an experience with it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to map my own experience. That's really what's going on.
Well, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's when this work gets interesting, is when you've got a personal inroad and some part of the story that has resonance for your work. And what's going to be resonant for you, what's going to be resonant for somebody else, might be really, really different. And that matters not a whit. This is living story, and your remez is going to be different than my remez, and that's okay.
Right.
So no, that's great. I know we're coming up. We're a little after 9 now, but I want to sort of open things up to open floor questions and administrivia. Yeah.
I don't want to go back onto the topic about the fall, but if there's other questions around. But I saw a lecture from Long Mileage Acad a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a lecture.
Is that in Sacramento?
Yeah, I heard it on the internet. It was fascinating.
Like, I don't remember everything about that because that was years ago and I was just still getting into it. But the idea of like the supernal triad being mirrored, that was kind of why that was there, because if you move it up, the whole thing is much more symmetrical. And I don't remember if it was like for variety or if it was the Adam and Eve like story and allegory put onto it, but it went from being like symmetrical to becoming like a different symbolism where it starts at the top and mirrors its way down instead of everything being connected. But if you heard that lecture, I can't tell you anything else about it.
Yeah, it was fascinating. He said it just looks like somebody just pulled it down. They just pulled that whole symbol down. And I've never heard that before. I mean, I've been reading about this stuff for a while, and I've always tried to look at this in not just a symbol way, but actually a living, breathing thing. Yeah. Almost like I'm underneath it and looking up above it, like it's a cathedral. And when I heard that lecture, it just got the imagination. I just saw the symbols starting to flip and move around and stuff like that. So
yeah, it really got me thinking about it too. Like
I would make a recommendation to both of you that if this stuff is interesting, not only look at lawn stuff, but also the person you want to melt your brain is Bob Stein. Bob Stein is really getting into some...
Is he alive?
I hope he still is.
I don't know who Bob Stein is. Is he local?
No, he's based in New York. He does occasionally tour and speak at O.T.O bodies. He's...
I think, actually.
Huh?
Boston, I think.
Oh, is he in Boston? I'm sorry, somewhere back east. But he's incredible, and he teaches some very interesting intersections of Kabbalah and sacred geometry. I find him very engaging. He does tend to get really kind of esoteric. But, you know, there are a lot of people who are doing that kind of work. Lon, of course. Eshelman will melt your brain a little bit on this stuff.
Who?
James Eshelman. But yeah, it's just, it's not,
vibration.
yeah. But yeah, a lot of that stuff's here. One other little thing I will say about the tree and the idea of the quote-unquote fall is the idea of klipot, which are the shells, or what happens when we get so rigid about our ideas of the Sephirot that they crack. When they stop being living, embodied concepts and start being something that can, I'm not fond of words like demonic, although other people would use those words for the klipot. I would say when things start becoming less useful shells, which is literally what a klipa is a shell. So sometimes you will hear people talk about mirror trees or shadow trees as the klipot, and they're, you know, people who are interested in ideas of the fall have an entire thing around that. It's not my jam, but it's out there to be studied.
I have a friend who's a licensed acupuncturist, and she once mentioned to me that our chi that circulates through our body, she has mentioned to me that it does have like a negative counterpart that's unhealthy, and maybe if you thought of it more in that way, then with moral connotations, that could be useful.
Yeah, no, it's just, yeah, it's a different way of looking at things. You know, even in, when I teach my From Yetzer to Yetzirah class, which I'm hoping to do in a couple of months, you know, the translations of Yetzer HaTov, which is the good inclination, and Yetzer Hara, which is the poor inclination, really fall down pretty quickly. Because there's this idea that without your Yetzer Hara, which I have officially renamed our inner chaos muppet, you never have lust, you don't start a family, you don't start a business, you don't get anything done. So from a Jewish theological perspective, which is where I tend to root my Kabbalah, there's not a whole lot of room for evil or fall or that kind of thing. That is useful for some people, and again, I'm not dissing it. It's just, it's very foreign to me, so I have a hard time locating my work there. Just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to have some administrative hoo-ha. Your question could be next. Yes?
What is the Jewish mystical stance on O.T.O and why it's there and not there?
I will tell you my Jewish mystical stance on O.T.O, and if you looked at a few good rabbis, actually I would recommend, there's an excellent book by Rabbi Bonder called Our Immoral Soul, which is excellent as far as treating, literally looking at our soul as indifferent to moral concepts. Rabbi Bonder does some great work. Steinsaltz is going to have some interesting perspectives that I don't. Rev David Cooper is going to have some interesting ideas. My personal perspective is that the connection between Da'at and sexuality is critical. That Da'at is located where it is and why it is because our ability for erotic connection and knowledge of the divine through an erotic perspective has the ability to literally crack open our psyches to something that is much bigger and much broader. And so as I am crossing the abyss, I'm crossing the abyss in part because I am pouring all of myself into something beyond myself, perfectly or imperfectly. And as I go through that process of truly identifying with the broader world and with the divine on a level that completely cracks open everything I think I know, and really instead find union, that's where the possibility of the transpersonal emerges. So for me, that pun of da'at is not at all accidental. I also believe that knowledge is a trap, that the importance of the supernal triad is that understanding and wisdom are about so much more than book knowledge, and that to truly apprehend things from the perspective of understanding and wisdom, we need to let go of some of the conceptual. And so I am very reticent to prioritize what we think we know. From the mystic's perspective, knowledge is a false path. So when I'm looking at things from sort of trying to put myself in the shoes of the rabbis who are doing the work of Pardes, the whole idea, I took it down, never mind, bye-bye Pardes. The whole idea of Pardes says, pshat, the plain meaning, what we think we know, is only a step, but it's not the heart of the matter. And that as we work with the divine, what we think we know is very dangerous, and that the divine is truly unknowable. And even if we believe there is no God but man, I've been working on self-awareness and sitting and drinking green tea and meditating for years. I don't know myself. And the more I think I know myself, the more I get trapped in identity politics that keeps me from my divine nature. So I think it's really important that da'at is a false sephira. I think it's one of the biggest remezim on the entire tree. I think it's a great question. And I'm counting the table again. Ben has seen me do this before.
I find it interesting that it almost mirrors Yasod on the tree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, but I do think one other thing that's going on there is everywhere else on the tree, we're saying these two things become greater than the sum of their parts beneath them, but knowledge is not greater than the sum of the parts of wisdom and understanding from this mystical perspective. It's a diminishment of those, or a reification, if you will. Brother Ben is pacing, which means I've probably gone over time. I thought I had till 9:30, man.
Yes.
One last exciting and scintillating question. I do?
Pacing.
Okay. One or two more exciting and scintillating questions. Yeah. Well, you haven't asked anything yet, so.
I was gonna say, you mentioned the abyss, and you've got the line up there, but you never really explained where it was or what it was. Why don't you say something about that?
Whew, yeah, that's its own fucking class. Okay, well, edit that out. I didn't swear.
You mentioned it.
No, it's a great point.
But you didn't say anything about
No,
where.
I just walked straight into that one, didn't I? I mean,
You kind of answered the question, but.
yeah, well, there are many different ways to use the tree. In our tradition specifically, right, within the context of Thelemic practical magic, one model of the tree, or one way to use the tree as a model, is of our own spiritual journey. And at some point, we leap and hope the universe catches us in her loving arms, right? And that's not just our journey. You know, if I'm going off to the mountain to be a Zen mystic for umpteen years and I'm hoping to reach samadhi, then I'm going through that same journey. But there is a deep, definite link between whether it's linear or whether it's even in the span of a few moments, when our concern is on our life and our identity as beings, and when it is strictly with the transpersonal. And that gap is as close to us as breathing in is to breathing out, and it's also really freaking big. And it feels like a huge desert that we're going across in our camel. So that desert we're going across in our camel is the abyss. And that's as close as I'm gonna get to it, because we're now in the land of poetry and not practicality. Okay, so I call this class All the Kabbalah You Really Need to Know in 72 Minutes or Less, which is a foolish boast. My goal in the class is that what you really need to know about Kabbalah is where you fit and where it can be useful to you. And if you're curious enough to want to learn more, then you've learned everything you really need to know. So this is Kol HaKabbalah Ata Tzricha, all the Kabbalah you really need. It is not Kol HaKabbalah Ata Rotza, it is not all the Kabbalah you want. At least it's not if I've done my job right. If you're interested in all kinds of things Kabbalistic, I very occasionally teach a series of classes that I've developed over the years. I also have a annotated and slightly snarky bibliography of all the books that I've referenced for this class. If you go to miriamgreen.wordpress.com, you will find my extremely outdated website that includes that bibliography and something that says I'm about to teach at NotaCon coming up in November 2013. The reason I am not teaching so much in the world of Kabbalah these days, as much as I would love to, in my other life I'm actually a kink and sexuality educator. I teach an entire series of Kink 101 classes at Wicked Grounds, which is my little war engine in San Francisco. If you ever want to get a high quality espresso from me or pick my brains about magic, that is where I can usually be found. And I am hoping to get back here in a couple of months to teach from Yetzer to Yetzirah, all about the nature of our souls and Muppets. And I can probably be found doing some kind of fist bumping about queer politics at the next NotaCon as well. We'll see. Thank you all for coming out here.